Welcome back. After Tuesday's courtroom decision that held a bad cop accountable for his actions, California Congresswoman Karen Bass is taking the next step forward towards meaningful change as lead author of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. She joins us now live from D.C. Welcome, Congresswoman. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's been almost 48 hours since the jury reached the guilty verdict on all 3 counts. What do you think was the thing that really moved this needle? What was different?
Well, I think what was different is that the evidence was just overwhelming. And to see a man tortured to death over 9 minutes and to have all the expert witnesses come on and say that the only reason he died was because of the knee on the neck. And the defense was not able to put on credible witnesses. In fact, their main scientific witness was under a lawsuit for fabricating his testimony in previous cases. And so I think it was just overwhelming.
Congresswoman, you know, police officers are so rarely convicted, especially of murder. President Biden said that this could be a moment of significant change. Do you agree that this is a tipping point for police reform?
Yes, instead of saying could be, I would say will be. I absolutely believe that we're going to get this over the finish line, and it's tremendous positive momentum from Tuesday because exactly as you said, this is a rare moment. And so we have to capture that energy and channel it, and I do believe that we're going to do that. There's a lot of goodwill going on here on the Hill, Democrats and Republicans working together.
Congresswoman, the prosecution in this case was very careful not to paint this trial as anti-police. They actually said it was pro-police because officers like Derek Chauvin make the rest look really bad. Now, we also saw 10 law enforcement officers testify against Chauvin. Do you think this verdict is the first step in changing police behavior?
Well, the verdict, no. I would love to think that, but I do hope that it puts police officers on notice that, you know, the blue wall was cracked, and it was incredible to see the officers come forward and testify because you're right, that never happens. But that's not going to be enough. First of all, of course I was glad at the verdict, but we need to be very mindful that a sentencing needs to happen as well. And in the rare occasion when there have been guilty verdicts, there have been judges that have given defendants a slap on the wrist, and that just can't happen this time. So I think we're in a great position, but it's going to take policy, legislative change, one on the federal level and on the state and local level to prevent these kind of occasions from continuing to happen.
Congresswoman, before the verdict was reached, President Biden weighed in saying he was praying for the right verdict. We also heard Congresswoman Waters' comments that protests should, quote, get more confrontational if the verdict came back not guilty. Do you think it's appropriate for politicians to weigh in while a jury is still deliberating? And do you think they might have, inadvertently given Chauvin grounds for an appeal?
Well, I was actually shocked when the judge said that. I have a hard time, but I do have to admit I'm not a lawyer, have a hard time seeing how a statement from a congresswoman would lead to an appeal. And I do think that she was referring to protest. And frankly, if it hadn't have been for massive protests, and I am only referring to peaceful protests, if it hadn't have been for that momentum last year, we would have never had the bill in the first place. And I think when President Biden made his statement, if I'm not mistaken, the jury was already sequestered.
That is correct. The jury was sequestered. Oh, she's still talking? Okay. I didn't hear your last words. Something went wrong with the technology. But yes, I wanted to reiterate, yes, the jury was sequestered when President Biden made that statement. So it's a moot point. As the jury was preparing to give the Chauvin verdict, 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant was shot 4 times and killed by Ohio police. Body cam footage shows she had a knife, but her family claims she was the one who called police, saying people were fighting outside her house. It's very much an active investigation, and it's confusing to me, I must say. Perhaps you can elucidate. I mean, what is your reaction to this point?
Well, first of all, that one was particularly personal to me because one of the issues I've worked on for decades is our child welfare system. And she was a foster child. She was in a group home, and it is a very common occurrence that in those group homes there are fights, and the police are often involved. But you know what? We have to take a step back and question, why do so many people die at the hands of police in the United States? I think it's too early to say what happened in that shooting. We were all looking at the video cams, and the officer certainly said that he had no choice because she was close to hurting another individual. But you know, since the trial started on March 29th, there have been over 69 officer-involved shootings that have resulted in death. At some point, we need to take a step back in our country and say, why is it that so many officer-involved interactions with citizens result in death? You probably saw the original report on George Floyd. It said that he died, that there was a medical emergency. If it hadn't have been for that 17-year-old that took that videotape, George Floyd's murder would have just gone by the wayside. And since he was killed May 29th of 2020, there have been over 100 officer-involved shootings that have resulted in death. So it's time that we take a real deep look at law enforcement in the United States and look at how do we change the culture so that we don't have these situations. How do we prevent them? And we have some very specific ideas.
A few miles down the road from George Floyd's murder, we saw Daunte Wright shot and killed by Officer Kim Potter. His funeral will be held today. We have heard claims Potter allegedly mistook her gun for a taser. She's resigned and is charged with second-degree manslaughter. Now, she seems to be saying it was a mistake, and a lot of us are having a hard time understanding how you can confuse a taser with a gun. Can you?
Well, not only that, how is it that you've been on the force for 26 years? I mean, I would have a hard time understanding that if you'd been on the force for 6 months. But we always say that training is the issue, and it just shows the training is not always the issue, because you can't tell me she wasn't trained. But I have a bigger question. Why was he stopped to begin with? He was stopped because his tags were expired? Well, apparently in that area and in many other areas around our country because of COVID, the Department of Motor Vehicles have been way behind, so lots of people have expired tags. Then they said they stopped him because he had air freshener hanging off of his mirror. See, one of the things in our bill that we are going to get signed by President Biden is looking at racial profiling. We have to look at the fact that African Americans and Latinos are stopped at extremely disproportionate rates. So yes, we can examine what happened at the moment that Daunte was killed. I want to raise the question as to why he was stopped to begin with.
We're going to have more with Congresswoman Karen Bass when we come back. We'll be right back, y'all. We're back with Congresswoman Karen Bass. Sonny.
Congresswoman, we clearly still have so much work to do in addressing policing in America. You mentioned earlier when it came to the Bryant shooting that the police officer said he had no choice, and some are saying that, of course, he had no choice because he couldn't even tell the age of the children involved. And as you know, black children are often adultified. It's called adultification bias because young black girls as early as 5 are considered not to need protection, the same amount of protection that white girls need. And you are a lead author of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which has already passed the House, but is now stalled in the Senate. The act includes a federal ban on chokeholds and, importantly, gets rid of qualified immunity for police officers. In my view, that's the most important. But what are the biggest changes you want to see when it comes to reform?
Sure, absolutely. Well, qualified immunity, as you mentioned, the ability to sue an officer, holding officers accountable, and so the ability to prosecute an officer, because even the prosecution of Derek Chauvin was unusual. And then raising the standards of policing. Policing should be like any other profession. So there's 18,000 police departments in the United States, and there's no national standards. There's no accreditation. We should be able to collect data so that we understand whether or not racial profiling has taken place. We should be able to provide grants to communities so communities can actually re-envision public safety. I think that there's a lot of things that we can do, and even though the bill right now is currently stalled in the Senate, I will tell you that we have been having conversations all along, and I feel very positive that after the energy from this trial and the success of the verdict, that we're going to be able to get this across the finish line, and soon.
I love that. Our thanks to you, Congresswoman Karen Bass. You come back anytime. Tell us what's going on and how we can all be better citizens.
Absolutely.
We, of course, will be right back.
Thank you.